Hi everybody, I hope you're enjoying your Wednesday off. This set of notes starts with one of my favorite quotes. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, therefore, is not an act, but a habit. And I found this quote to be especially fitting for this section because it was Aristotle that said this quote. Remember, he's one of the fathers of logic. Now, in 3.3, we're going to start looking at truth tables. Okay? Truth tables are going to be helpful for us because they can help us determine the value of a statement overall. They can help us determine if two different statements are equivalent. They also can help us determine if a statement is a tautology. Okay? Tautology is one of those fun words. If two statements are tautologies, it means that the outcome is always true. Okay. So it's just a fun little tidbit to know, fun word to say. Okay. Truth tables can also help us determine if certain types of arguments are either valid or invalid. Now, before we get into too much detail about truth tables, we need to look individually at the different logic material that we've talked about so far, like negations, conjunctions, disjunctions. So let's look at the negation table first. Okay. Remember that one of the key things about negating something is that if it's true to begin with, it becomes false, and if it was false to begin with, it becomes true. Okay. So even though you've heard me say that several times, what I've done here is I've set it up in a table. So notice that I have statement P, and then in the next column I have the heading negate P. Okay. Statement P has the options of either being true or false, and then from there I fill in my not P column with false and true. Okay. Now, notice that in this case, too, when I had just had one statement, so in this case I just had statement P, I end up with two different cases. I had a true case to start with, and I had a false case to start with. Okay. Now, that may seem trivial at this point, but as we start adding more statements to our truth tables, we're going to see that there are more cases we need to consider. For example, when we start looking at the conjunction table, when we find a conjunction, we need two statements. We need a P and a Q. Anytime we have two statements, we will always have four different cases that we need to consider. Okay. So those four cases are going to be that P and Q are both true, that P is true and Q is false, that P is false and Q is true, and then that P and Q are both false. Okay, so as we fill in P and Q for this table that has two statements, it's going to go true, 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 false, false, true, false, false. Okay. Now, when we look at these combinations, notice that in this table we're looking at P and Q. Okay. The only way that an and statement is true is when we have true and true. Okay. So this is going to be the case that you really want to make sure that you remember for and. True and true is true. That is the only time that an and is going to be true. Every other case is going to automatically be false. So if you focus on remembering that when it's and, you have to have true, true in order to be true, you get all the others for free because those ones are automatically false. So let's make ourselves a little note here that the one case we want to remember for and is true, true, and true. Now, sometimes this might sound a little silly, okay? The way that I remember this is A, T, and T. There's an extra T there, but for whatever reason, it just sticks in my mind. A, T, and T. When I have and, A for and, it's true, true, and true. All right, let's check out the disjunction table this time. So remember, disjunction is that fancy name for or, okay? I still have two statements I'm dealing with. I have a statement P and a statement Q. So I'm still going to have those same four cases I did in the previous slide. I'm going to have P is true, Q is true, P is true, Q is false, P is false, Q is true, and then both P and Q are both false. Okay. Now, just like there was one piece we really wanted to make sure we remembered for and, there's going to be one piece that we really want to make sure we remember for or. Anytime I have P and Q are both false, P or Q is also false. So when P is false and Q is false, P or Q is false. All the other situations are true. So if you remember this one combination, or false, false is false, you automatically know that the others are true. Okay, so the one to remember for or is false, false, false. Now, similar to my little silly AT&T, in this one I remember the word or starts with the letter O, so I remember the word off. Now again, there's an extra F, but if it's or, false, 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 we end up with O-F-F-F, off. Okay, so now that we've looked at some combinations of ands and ors and negations with truth values, let's look at two particular statements. We have statement P is 4 plus 6 equals 10, and we have statement Q is 5 times 8 equals 80. Now, is statement P true or false? Does 4 plus 6 equal 10? Yes, it does. So we can say that statement P is true. Is statement Q true or false? Does 5 times 8 equal 80? Nope, it doesn't. So statement Q is going to be false. We can use those truth values now to help us figure out if other statements are true or false. Okay? So we want to determine the truth value of not P or negate P. Okay, so if P was true to begin with, if we negate it, it will become false. Okay. How about Q and P? Okay, Q is false and P is true. When I have and, remember that I need AT and T. I need it to be true, true is true. If I don't have that combination, then it is automatically false. If I have false and true, I don't have that combination, so this would automatically be false. Okay. How about P and not Q? Okay. P we already decided was true, and not Q. Well, if Q is false, not Q would be true. So we're really talking about true and true. So remember when I have and, ding, 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 true, true is true. So true and true is true. Okay. Our last one says not Q or not P. So this one's got an or, not an and this time. So pay close attention to the difference. Not Q. So Q is false. Not Q will be true. Or not P. P was true, so not P will be false. So I end up with true or false. Remember that anytime I have or, I need off. It has to be false, false is false. Well, if I look at this, true or false is not that scenario. So if it's not false, false is false, it's automatically true. Okay? So it's really important that you pay attention to the difference in the and the or. With and, true, true is true. Everything else is automatically false. With or, false, false is false. Everything else is automatically true. All right, let's try a few more. Okay? This time we are told that P is false, Q is true, and R is false. Okay? We don't know what P, Q, and R are, but we know that P is false, Q is true, and R is false. Okay? We want to determine the truth value of each of the following. Okay? The first one tells me P or the quantity Q and R. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace each of those statement letters with their truth value. So where I see a P, I'm now going to write in F because P was false. I'm going to copy over my or symbol. Okay? I'm going to copy over my parenthesis because Q and R is in parentheses. Q was true, so where Q is, I'm going to write a T. Copy over my and symbol, and where R is false, I'm going to write false, and I'm going to close those parentheses. Okay? Now, just like when you're doing the order of operations, we need to start in the parentheses. Okay, so the very first thing we're going to look at is true and false. When we look at true and false, remember and has to be true, true to be true. All other scenarios are false. So if we have true and false, we don't have true, true is true, so it's automatically false. So at this point, I have the false that I had copied over from P, I have my or to copy over, and my true and false was false. This leaves me with false or false. Remember with or, I have to have false, false is false. So false or false is false. So this statement simplifies all the way down in order to be a false statement. Okay. The next one we're going to look at is negate P and the quantity negate Q and R. Okay. So if we know that P is false, not P or negate P is going to be true. Okay. I'll copy over my and symbol, copy over my parenthesis, not Q. Q is true, so not Q is going to be false. Copy over my and symbol, R. R is false. Okay. So just like the previous example, remember that the not Q and R was in parentheses, so my false and false is in parentheses now. Always start in those parentheses. So I am starting with false and false. Remember when I have and, I'm looking for true, true, true. I do not have that in this case, so false and false is false. Okay. I still have my true from previously, my not P was true, and I'm going to copy over my and symbol. So I now have true and false. Okay. Again, when I'm looking at an and, it has to be true, true is true. I don't have that in this case, so true and false is false. Okay. The last one on this page says negate the quantity P or Q and R. So the P and Q, or the P or Q is what's in parentheses, and we need to negate that. Okay. When I write this out originally, I'm going to copy over my negation symbol. I'm going to replace my P with an F because P is false. I'm going to copy over my or symbol. I'm going to replace my Q with a T because Q is true. Copy over my and symbol. And I'm going to replace R with F for false. Okay. Now remember, P or Q is in parentheses, so I'm going to start by looking at my false or true. Okay. I have an or statement. In order, anytime we're looking at or, we're looking for false, false is false. If it's not false, false is false, then it's automatically true. So in this case where I have false or true, that becomes true. I still have my negation symbol in the front, And following that true, I have an and F still. Okay. If I negate true, it becomes false. So I now have false and false. When I look at and, remember I have to have true, true is true. If I don't have that, which I don't in this case, it's automatically false. Okay. So a lot to keep track of. So it's important that you write out every step. Okay. The other reason that it can be a lot to keep track of is why we put things in truth tables. Okay. We're going to see a truth table in the next slide. So when we build a truth table, we're essentially doing the exact same thing we did in the previous examples. We're just putting it into an organized format. Okay? The very first truth table we're going to build is going to be for negate the quantity P or Q. Okay? So that P or Q is in parentheses, that negate symbol is out front. Now, when I build a truth table, because what I'm looking at has a P and a Q, I need to make my first column P, I need to make my second column Q. Now remember, we looked at the different combinations we can have where P is true and Q is true. So in that first row, I'm going to fill in true and true. In my second row, I'm going to have P is true and Q is false. In my third row, I'm going to have P is false and Q is true. And in that fourth row, I'm going to have P is false and Q is false. So remember, anytime I have two statements, a P and a Q, I have four different cases I need to look at. True, 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 false, false, true, and false, false. Okay. Now, remember we're building a truth table for the statement negate the quantity P or Q. So before we negate it, we have to figure out the truth value for P or Q. Okay. Now remember, because we're looking at or, P or Q, I'm looking for that combination of false or false is false. Okay. So as I go down my rows, row 1, do I have false and false? No. Row 2, do I have false and false? No. Row 3, do I have false and false? No. Row 4, do I have false and false? Yes. So false or false is false. Okay. Everything else automatically becomes a true. So the first row for P or Q is true. The second row for P or Q is true. The third row for P or Q is true. And that fourth row for that P or Q is false. Okay. Now I need to negate each of those in order to come up with my final statement of negate the quantity P or Q. So my fourth column is labeled negate P or Q. Okay. If P or Q is true, when I negate it, my first row will become false. My second row of P or Q is true, so when I negate it, it will also become false. My third row is true. When I negate that, it will become false. And my fourth row is false. When I negate that, it will become true. So my very final column, negate P or Q, reads false, 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 true. Let's try another one. This time we want to construct a truth table for not P and not Q. Okay. So we know when we look at that original question that asks us to make a truth table for not P and not Q, we're going to have to start with a P and a Q. Okay. Same exact four combinations. I'm going to have P is true, Q is true. P is true, Q is false. P is false, Q is true. And P is false, Q is false. Okay. Now, the third column in my table is not P. When I'm trying to find not P, I need to go back and reference my P column. Okay. The first row of P was true, so not P will be false. The second row of P was also true, so not P will be false. The third row of P was false, so that first row or that third row of not P is going to be true. And that fourth row of P was false, so that fourth row of not P is going to be true. So my not P column reads false, false, true, true. Okay. My fourth column has a heading of not Q. So when I look at that, I need to reference back to my second column, which was the Q column. Okay. The first row of Q is true, so not Q will be false. The second row of Q is false, so not Q will be true. The third row of Q is true, so that third row of not Q will be false. And that fourth row of Q is false, so that fourth row of not Q will be true. So my not Q column reads false, true, false, true. Okay. Now we need to put that all together in my last column. My last column has a heading of not P and not Q. Okay. So when I look at this very last column, I'm putting not P together with not Q. So I need to go back and reference the third and the fourth columns. Okay. And remember that when it's an and, I need to be looking for true. True is true. Okay. True and true is true. All right, so as I look down my not P and my not Q columns, the first row has false and false. The second row has false and true. The third row has true and false. And that fourth row has true and true. Because it's and I'm looking for, I know that true and true is true. So my fourth row will automatically be true. Everything else by default is then a false. So my very final column of not P and not Q reads false, 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 true. Take a second to peek back at the previous example in your notes where we looked for negate the quantity P or Q. Notice that the last column of that table was false, 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 true. The last column of the table we just constructed, not P and not Q, is also false, 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 true. Okay? These two final results are the exact same results. False, 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 true. Anytime they have the same results like that, it means that they are equivalent. So by constructing these two truth tables, we know that if we negate the quantity P or Q, it's equivalent to not P and not Q. Okay. Now, that should look maybe somewhat familiar to you back from when we talked about Venn diagrams and sets. This is actually De Morgan's law. Okay. Anytime you're going to distribute that negation symbol through, your sign also has to change. So if it was an and, it will become an or. If it was an or, it will become an and. Okay? So if I want to negate the quantity P or Q, it's equivalent to not P and not Q. If I wanted to negate the quantity P and Q, that would be equivalent to not P or not Q. Okay. So sometimes writing that in one form or the other can just be a little bit shortcut. Okay, so it's good to know those De Morgan's laws. Is it the end of the world if you don't memorize them? No, not at all. But it's handy to know those two. Okay, the next truth table we're going to construct is going to be for negate the quantity P and not Q. Okay, so we've still got P and Q in the game. So we know that our very first two columns in our truth table need to be P and Q. And we're going to have the exact same four cases. We're going to have true, 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 false, false, true, and false, false. Okay. Now the third column, if I look inside those parentheses, I already have my P, but I don't have my not Q yet. Okay, so the very next thing I need in my third column is going to be that not Q. Okay, and remember, to find my not Q, I just need to reference back to my Q column and do the opposite of what's already there. So in the first row of Q, I had true. That's going to become false. In that second row of Q, I had false. That will become true. In that third row of Q, I had false. That will become true. I said that backwards. Rewind. In the third row of Q, I had true. That will become false. And in the fourth row of Q, I had false. That will become true. So my not Q column, that third column, now reads false, true, false, true. Okay. Now, look inside those parentheses, that quantity P and not Q. Okay. I need to reference my P column, and I need to reference my not Q column. Okay. So temporarily, I can ignore that Q column. What I care about is this P column and this not Q column. Okay. Now remember that when I'm looking for and, I need true and true is true. So as I go down my rows, I'm looking for true and true is true. Okay, my first row. True and false. Nope. True and true. Ding, ding, ding. We have a winner. So true and true is true. Third row, false and false. Nope. Fourth row, false and true. Nope. So the first, the third, and the fourth row are automatically false. Okay. So that fourth column of P and not Q reads false, true, false, false. Okay. Now the fifth column in my truth table needs to take that and negate it. So I need to negate the quantity P and not Q. Okay. So when I do that, I need to reference back to that column I just made, that P and not Q. And if I want to negate it, I'm just going to take the opposite of those truth values that are already there. Okay. So my fourth column, which read false, true, false, false, I'm going to negate that whole column and do the opposites. So I'm going to have true, false, true, true. So the very final column, my final result, that negate P and not Q, is going to read true, false, true, true. All right, this time we are going to have to fill in the headings for our truth table. We need to construct a truth table for not the quantity, not P or Q, so that not P or Q is in parentheses, and not Q. Okay. So when I look at that, I know that I'm going to have a statement P, and I know I'm going to have a statement Q. So the very first two columns, just like all my other truth tables that I've made, are going to have headings of P and Q. Okay. And they will have four cases: true, 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 false, false, true, and false, false. Okay. Now, if I look within the parentheses where it says not P or Q, I already have my Q, but what I don't have is not P. So let's make our third column be not P. Now remember, when I look at not P, I need to reference back to my P column. Okay. The first row of P was true, so the first row of not P is going to be false. The second row of P was true, so the second row of not P is also going to be false. The third row of P was false, so my third row of not P is going to be true. The fourth row of P was false, so the fourth row of my not P is going to be true. Okay. So now I have all the pieces I need for inside those parentheses. So my fourth column is going to be what's inside those parentheses, that not P or Q. Okay. So the only columns I need to be looking at right now are not P and Q. Okay. Now remember, this is an or in my heading. I have not P or Q. So because it's or, I'm looking for false or falses, false. Okay. So if I look at the first row of Q and the first row of not P, I have true and false. So that doesn't do the job. If I look at the second row, I have false and false. Woohoo! There we go. False or false is false. If I look at the third row of Q and not P, I have true and true. Nope, that's not it. If I look at that fourth row, I have false and true. That's not it. So the only row that gave me false, false is false is that second row. Everything else, that first, that third, and that fourth row, I'm going to fill in with true. Okay. Now, if I look outside of those parentheses, I still need a not Q, and I haven't made a column for not Q yet. So let's make that fifth column not Q. Okay. When I fill in the column for not Q, I need to go back and reference my Q column from the beginning. Okay. My first row of Q is true, so my first row of not Q is going to be false. My second row of Q is false, so my second row of not Q is going to be true. Third row of Q is true, so my third row of not Q will be false. Fourth row of Q is false, so my fourth row of not Q will be true. Okay. Now that last column, that sixth column, needs to read the quantity not P or Q and not Q. Okay. Now at this point, realize I'm looking for an and. So I'm looking for true, and true is true. Okay. And the two columns that I now need to be looking at are my not P and Q or Q column and my not Q column. Okay. And I'm looking for true, true is true. Okay. So if I look at my first column, I have false, or I have true, false. That's not it. Look at that second row, I have false, true. That's not it. Look at my third row, I have true, false. That's not it. Fourth row is true, true. True and true is true. So in that fourth row of my last column, I can fill in a true. Those other three rows, the first, second, and third rows, all get falses. Okay. So the very final result in this truth table for the quantity not P or Q and not Q is false, 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 true. Okay, so in the last example, they didn't give me the headings in my truth table. Okay, in this case, they only give me some of my headings, but they also give me a compound statement. Okay, the compound statement that they give me is, I study hard and ace the final, or I fail the course. Now, when I look at this, I need to pick out what each of my statements is. I actually have three statements here. Okay, I have I study hard. We'll call that statement P. Okay, I have ace the final. We'll call that statement Q. And I also have I fail the course, we'll call that statement R. So I have three statements in this truth table, P, Q, and R. Okay. Now, remember that when I'm picking out those statements, the way that I knew what each statement was is I worked around the connective pieces. I worked around that word and I worked around that piece or. Okay. So remember that and is going to be a connector. So I'm going to have P and Q. Or is also going to be a connector. I'm going to have an or symbol over my word or. Okay. And there's a comma in this sentence. It says, I study hard and ace the final, comma, or I fail the course. Remember that comma tells me I need to use parentheses. Okay. I base where I use parentheses based upon which part of my sentence has two statements. If I look before my comma, I have a P and a Q. If I look after my comma, all I have is an or. So I need to put my parentheses around P and Q. Okay, so this tells me that when I write, I study hard and ace the final, or I fail the course, symbolically, I've got P and Q in parentheses, and then outside of that I have or are. Okay. Now, when I set up my truth table, I need to have 3 columns now. I need to have a column for P, a column for Q, and a column for R. Hold on one second, phone's ringing. All right, sorry about that. So we're used to seeing typically a P and a Q, which just has 4 cases. When we have a P, a Q, and an R, 3 statements is going to give me 8 cases. Okay, so anytime we have 3 statements, these truth tables definitely get a bit longer. Okay, now those 8 cases are going to be the same 8 cases every time, just like when you had 2 statements, we had the same 4 cases every time. Okay, so when we have P, Q, and R, we're going to have the following combinations, row by row. We're going to have true, 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 false, true, false, true, true, false, 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 true, true, false, true, false, 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 true, and false, false, false. Okay, now I don't expect you to memorize those 8 cases. Okay, you do need to know the 4 cases, but anytime you have a truth table with 8 cases, I'll give you those combinations. Okay, now let's go back to our statement. Remember, we had the quantity P and Q or R. Okay, so I already have my P, I already have my Q. The 4th column I need to write is going to be P and Q. So when I look at P and Q, it's an and, I'm looking for true and true is true. So I'm going to go down my P column and my Q column and look for that true, true combination. So in my very first row, I have true and true, that's true. Okay. My second row, I have true and true, that's true. My third row, I have true and false, that doesn't work. True and false, 4th row, that doesn't work. 5th row, false and true, that doesn't work. 6th row, false and true, nope. 7th row, false and false, nope. And 8th row, false and false, that doesn't do it either. So the only time I had true and true is my very first 2 rows. Rows 3 through 8 all get filled in with falses. Okay. Now, if I look outside of those parentheses, I now have an or are. Well, I already filled in my R column, so I'm good there. So my next column, my 5th column, is going to be the quantity P and Q or R. Now realize at this point, I just made a column for P and Q, and I already have a column for R. So when I fill in this last column, I'm referencing back my P and Q column, and I'm referencing back to my R column. Okay. The first row of R is true, and the first row of P and Q is true. But since I'm looking for an or at this point, I'm trying to find false, falses, false. Okay. False or false is false. Okay. And in that first row I had true and true, so that doesn't get the job done. Okay. Second row I have false and true. Nope. Third row, true and false. No. 4th row, false and false. Yes. So on that 4th row that I had false, false, I'm going to fill in a false. Okay. Next row, true, false. Nope. Next row, false, false. Yes. So on that 6th row, I'm going to fill in a false, falses, false. 7th row, true, false. Nope. 8th row, I've got another false. False is false. Okay, so that means my first, my second, my third, my 5th, and my 7th rows are going to get filled in with true. Okay, and that's my final result. I actually don't need any more columns than that because I've shown the result of the statement that they initially gave me. Okay, let's try one more with 8 cases on the next page. All right, this is it. This is our last example. It's another one with 8 cases because I have 3 statements. Okay, this time I'm going to construct a truth table for the quantity R or not P and not Q. Okay, so that R or not P is what's in parentheses. Okay, I'm starting out the exact same way with a P column, a Q column, and a R column. Okay, I have true, 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 false, true, false, true, true, false, 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 true, true, false, true, false, 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 true, and false, false, false. The exact same 8 cases I had in the previous example. Okay. Now, if I look inside my parentheses, remember I always want to start inside my parentheses, I'm looking at R or not P. Well, I already have a column for R, so the next column I need to make is not P. The first row of P was true, so the first row of not P will be false. The second row of P was true, so the second row of not P will be false. Third row of P was true, so the third row of not P will be false. Fourth row of P was true, so the fourth row of not P is false. Now we're going to switch. Fifth row of P was false, so fifth row of not P is true. Same with the 6th row, the 7th row, and the 8th row. So my not P column reads false, 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 true, 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 true. Okay. So I have all the pieces I need for inside those parentheses. So my 5th column heading is going to be that entire inside of those parentheses, R or not P. Now remember, I'm looking at an or. Anytime I have or, I'm looking for false or false is false. Okay. So as I go down my rows, I'm looking for a combination of false and false. Okay. In my first row, I have R is true, not P is false. Nope. Second row, R is false, not P is false. Ding, ding, ding. We have a winner. That means that it is false. Third row, true, false. Nope. Fourth row, false, false is false. Okay. 6th row, true, true. Nope. That was the 5th row. 6th row is false, true. Nope. 7th row is true, true. Nope. 8th row is false, true. Nope. So the only rows that I got combinations of false, false is false is on my 2nd row and my 4th row. The 1st, the 3rd, the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th, those will all be true. Okay. So my 5th column, which was my R or not P, going down by the row is true, false, true, false, true, 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 true. Okay. Now, outside of those parentheses, I have a and not Q. I have not made a column yet for not Q, so the next column I need to make is not Q. Remember that when I fill in not Q, I need to reference back to my original Q column. Okay. So in my original Q column, I had that Q was true in the first row, so not Q will be false. Okay. Q was true in my second row, so not Q in my second row will be false. Q is false in my third row, so not Q in my third row will be true. Q is false in my fourth row, so not Q will be true. Q is true in my 5th row, so not Q will be false. Q is true in my 6th row, so not Q will be false. Q was false in my 7th row, so not Q will be true. And Q again was false in my 8th row, so not Q will be true. So my not Q column reads down false, false, true, true, false, false, true, true. All right, I have all the pieces I need now for my final statement. My very final column is going to be R or not P in parentheses, and then outside of those parentheses, and not Q. So as I fill in this very last column, I'm referencing back to my R or not Q or not P column, and I'm also referencing back to my not Q column. At this point, those two pieces are connected by an AND symbol, so I'm looking for true and true is true. Okay. First row, I have true, false. That's not it. Second row, I have false, false. Nope. Third row, I have true, true. Here we go. True, true is true. Fourth row, I have false, true. That's not it. Fifth row, I have true, false. That doesn't get the job done. Sixth row, true, false. Nope. Seventh row, true, true. That's true. Eighth row, true and true is true. So I have trues in my 3rd row, my 7th row, and my 8th row. All the other rows, the 1st, the 2nd, the 4th, 5th, and 6th, all are false. So when I read down that very last column of the quantity R or not P and not Q, I have false, false, true, false, 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 true, true. Okay. I hope you learned a lot from today's lesson. It's going to be really important that you understand 3.3 in order for us to move forward in any of the remaining sections. So if that means that maybe you need to go back and rewatch it or rework some of the problems out or email me questions, please, please, please be proactive in doing that. It is super duper important that you understand this section. Okay? I'll see you guys on Friday. I hope you enjoyed your day, quote unquote, off, even though you had this outside assignment, but you didn't get to see my smiling face today, which hopefully didn't devastate you too much. I'll see you guys later. Bye.